It begins with a moment so gentle, it almost feels like a memory you once lived yourself. A warm kitchen light glowing against the early evening sky. A mother humming softly as she stands at the counter, cutting fruit for her little girl. And a small voice, light and happy, floating through the room. Abigail loved to talk. She talked about school, about the stories she read, about the pictures she drew. She talked about the birds outside her window and the way the mountains looked purple at night. She was 6 years old, full of energy, full of questions, and full of the kind of innocence that makes the world seem safe. Her mother, Jennifer, listened to every word. She always did. She would bend down, brush Abigail's hair behind her ear, and smile with the kind of love that showed in her eyes before it ever reached her lips. People who knew them said the same thing again and again. These two were inseparable. A little girl's drawings taped to the fridge. A half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. Jennifer's neatly folded laundry at the edge of the couch. The kind of small, ordinary details that tell you a family was trying, really trying, to build a calm, steady life. But sometimes, the quietest homes carry the heaviest secrets. And sometimes, the softest moments are the last ones before everything breaks. No one in that neighborhood had any way of knowing how fast a peaceful evening could turn into something unthinkable. No one imagined that within hours, this warm little home would become the center of a nightmare, a place investigators would walk through with flashlights and cameras, trying to understand the violence hidden inside the silence. Because the next morning, the house wasn't filled with Abigail's voice. There was no humming from the kitchen. There was no sound at all. Instead, there was an empty hallway. Unanswered calls. A stillness that felt wrong the second anyone stepped inside. And then came the discovery that changed everything. In the main bedroom, the sheets were missing. And the mattress, the place where a mother should have slept beside the man she trusted, was stained with blood. More than anyone could explain. More than anyone wanted to believe. Jennifer wasn't there. Her body was gone. And the little girl who should have been eating cereal at the table, the child who should have been packing her school bag, the tiny voice that once filled the house with light, she was gone too. No note. No clues. No sign of a struggle outside the home. Just the heavy reality that a mother and her daughter had vanished in the middle of the night, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their last peaceful moments. It didn't take long for the panic to spread. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, whispering to each other. Police cars lined the street. Officers moved in and out of the house with sharp faces and clipped voices. Something terrible had happened, something no one wanted to say out loud. Investigators tried to put the pieces together, but the scene only raised more questions. Why so much blood? Why no signs of forced entry? Why 2 missing people and no trail to follow? Most of all, one question hung over everything, from the living room to the front yard to every officer's mind as they looked at the quiet street. Where is Abigail? A 6-year-old doesn't just disappear. A 6-year-old doesn't walk away alone in the middle of the night. A 6-year-old doesn't leave behind the toys she loved, the blanket she slept with, or the mother she clung to. Something happened in that house. Something violent. Something planned, or desperate, or cruel. And whatever happened, Abigail was taken with it. Her drawings still taped to the fridge. Her tiny shoes still by the door. Her breakfast bowl still on the counter. But the little girl herself was gone as if the earth pulled her under. That image, the warm evening with a loving mother and her bright little girl, becomes harder to remember once the reality sets in. The quiet house. The mattress. The blood. The empty rooms. The missing child. People who worked this case still talk about that first day. They still remember the sharp cold that settled in their stomachs as the truth sank in. They knew this wasn't a typical disappearance. They knew this was the beginning of something dark. For the rest of the community, the story started with fear. A fear that a mother had been harmed. A fear that a child was in danger. A fear that someone, somewhere, had taken Abigail and wasn't planning to bring her back. The world kept moving, but inside this small Colorado neighborhood, time felt frozen. Parents held their children closer. Families locked their doors earlier. People prayed, hoping the little girl would be found safe. But deep down, almost everyone felt the same terrible chill. Something awful happened in that home. Something that tore a family apart. Something that left behind a mystery so heavy, even years later, no one can shake it off. And it all begins with that one haunting question. A question that echoes long after the police tape comes down, long after the cameras leave, long after the world forgets. Where is Abigail? Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you want more cases where time finally reveals the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Abigail was the kind of child people instantly liked. She had soft brown hair that curled at the ends, bright eyes that lit up when she talked, and a smile that made strangers smile back without even realizing it. She was 6, curious about everything, always asking why the sky changed colors and why cookies tasted better when her mom baked them. She loved stickers, bedtime stories, and the way her mother tucked her blanket under her chin every night. Jennifer, her mother, was gentle in a way that made people feel safe. She had a quiet voice, a warm laugh, and a patient heart. Friends said she never raised her voice at Abigail, never rushed her, never ignored her endless questions. Even on hard days, she tried to keep the home peaceful. She worked, cooked, cleaned, cared, and still made time to sit beside her daughter while she colored or played with her dolls. To everyone around her, Jennifer was the steady center of the family, the person who held everything together with soft hands and a softer heart. Then there was Michael, the father. To the community, he was a calm, polite man. He attended church, volunteered when he could, and kept a neat appearance. He spoke quietly, carried himself with control, and rarely showed big emotions in public. People described him as reserved, serious, and disciplined. Together, he and Jennifer looked like they had a stable, organized life. A picture-perfect family with strong values, a nice home, and a beautiful daughter. From the outside, everything looked almost ideal. A tidy house on a quiet street. A mother devoted to her child. A father focused on his job and faith. A little girl who filled the place with joy. Neighbors saw them at church events, family gatherings, school functions. They looked normal. They looked happy. There were no loud arguments, no police calls, no public scenes. If someone drove past their home, they would see a trimmed lawn, a swing set in the yard, and Abigail playing with sidewalk chalk while her parents watched from the porch. But the truth inside a home is never as simple as what people see from the driveway. Behind closed doors, small cracks existed. Cracks only a few people noticed and even fewer understood. Jennifer sometimes looked tired, like her mind was somewhere far away. She smiled often, but not always with her eyes. Once in a while, neighbors saw her glance over her shoulder before speaking, or tighten her jaw when Michael walked into the room. She wasn't the type to complain. She wasn't the type to ask for help. But small signs were there. A friend remembered Jennifer suddenly canceling plans without explaining why. Another noticed she started attending church more frequently, sitting quietly with a strained expression, as if she was carrying something heavy but didn't dare let it show. Michael, on the other hand, had a kind of strictness behind his calm exterior. He liked routine. He liked control. Some people who worked with him said he could be intense, not loud, not aggressive, but tense in a way that made the air feel sharper around him. At gatherings, he spoke for the family more than Jennifer did. Even when someone asked her a question, he often answered first. It wasn't enough for anyone to think something was seriously wrong. Not enough to raise alarms. Just enough to leave an uneasy feeling in the moments between the smiles. And like many families who appear perfect from a distance, the Blaggs' life had shadows that no one else saw, shadows that would only make sense later, when everything had already fallen apart. For now, in this part of the story, they were just a normal family. A beautiful child, a gentle mother, a serious but devoted father. A quiet home on a safe street. A family that looked complete. But sometimes the families that look the most perfect are the ones holding the deepest secrets. Sometimes the brightest child is living closest to the dark. And sometimes the signs that something is wrong are so soft, so subtle, that no one realizes what they mean until it's too late. November 12th began like any other day in the Blagg home. Nothing unusual, nothing noisy, nothing that hinted at the storm waiting just hours away. Jennifer woke early, moving quietly through the kitchen the way she always did. She made coffee, packed Michael's lunch, and helped Abigail get ready for school. Abigail sat at the table swinging her legs, talking about the butterfly she'd drawn the day before and how she wanted to make another one when she got home. Jennifer listened, smiling the whole time, brushing crumbs off her daughter's shirt before sending her out the door with her backpack bouncing behind her. Michael left for work the same way he always did. A quick goodbye, keys in his hand, and a straight face that rarely changed. Neighbors saw him pull out of the driveway like it was any normal Monday morning. Jennifer stayed home. It was her day to catch up on chores, fold laundry, and take a moment to breathe in the quiet. She answered a few calls, did small tasks, and moved through the house with the same calm energy she always had. Nothing about her routine stood out. No one visiting, no strange cars, no disturbances. Just another simple day. That afternoon, Abigail came home from school and went straight to her room. She dumped out her crayons, worked on a picture she had been excited about, and then ran to the kitchen to show her mom. Jennifer hung it on the fridge like she always did. They spent the next hours doing ordinary things. Homework, snacks, small conversations, a little TV. As evening settled in, the house took on its usual quiet rhythm. Jennifer helped Abigail into her pajamas, checked her bed for her favorite stuffed toy, and tucked her in under her pink blanket. Abigail yawned, curled up, and asked for a story. Jennifer read to her until her eyes grew heavy and her breathing slowed into sleep. It was just after 8 when the lights in Abigail's room went off. Just after 8 when Jennifer closed the door softly behind her. The night outside was still. No wind. No noise. Inside, the house felt calm, ordinary, almost too ordinary. Jennifer stayed up a while longer, cleaning the kitchen, sorting laundry, setting things in place for the next morning. She had no idea these would be her final hours in that home. She didn't send any strange messages, didn't call anyone in panic, didn't act like she sensed danger. If she felt uneasy, she didn't show it. Michael returned home from work. Nothing dramatic followed. No shouting. No loud footsteps. No neighbors noticing anything unusual. But sometimes danger doesn't walk in with noise. Sometimes it moves in silence, slipping into a house where everything seems calm. The last known moments inside the Blagg home were quiet, almost too quiet. A normal day. A normal night. A mother finishing chores. A child asleep in her bed. A father moving through the house with the same composure he always had. Nothing big happened. Nothing obvious. And that is exactly what makes the unease begin to creep in. Because in stories like this, the quietest nights are often the ones that hide the darkest truths. And the people inside the house have no idea that when they close their eyes, they're laying down for the last time as a family. The next morning began with a kind of silence that didn't belong in a house with a 6-year-old child. It wasn't the normal quiet of early hours or the gentle calm of people still asleep. This was a heavier silence, the kind that feels wrong the moment you notice it. A silence that sits in the air like something waiting to be discovered. Michael said he woke up and found the house still and empty. No footsteps from Jennifer moving around the kitchen. No tiny voice from Abigail asking for breakfast. No cartoons playing in the background. Just a stillness that didn't make sense. He walked through the hallway, calling Jennifer's name once, then again, calling for Abigail. Nothing answered him, not even the soft sound of movement. Just that cold quiet stretching through every room. When he reached the master bedroom, the unease in his stomach slowly turned into something sharper. The bed didn't look right. Jennifer's side was stripped bare. The sheets were missing. And the mattress, something about it pulled him closer, made his breath stop in his throat. There was blood. Not a small stain. Not something you could mistake for anything else. A dark, heavy mark soaked into the mattress itself. A sight that didn't match the peaceful home from the night before. Whatever happened here hadn't been gentle. It hadn't been sudden or small. It had been violent. Jennifer wasn't in the room. Her clothes were still in the drawers, her shoes still by the closet door, but she herself was gone. The empty space where she should have been felt louder than any scream. Then came the realization that made the fear twist even harder. Abigail was gone too. Her bed was empty. Her blankets untouched. Her favorite stuffed toy lying at the edge of her pillow as if waiting for her to come back and grab it. Her small shoes were still by the front door. Her backpack was still where she left it the day before. A 6-year-old doesn't just disappear. A 6-year-old doesn't leave her house without her mother. A 6-year-old doesn't walk out into the cold morning and vanish silently. The house told one story, and it wasn't a story of two people walking away willingly. Michael made the call to police, and soon the quiet street began to fill with officers. First one car, then another, then more. Lights flashing silently in the early light. Neighbors stepped outside, confused and curious, not yet aware of the horror building inside the Blagg home. Police entered the house carefully. They moved through each room with slow, tense steps. They checked the doors, the windows, the closets, Abigail's room. Every detail began piling up into a picture no one wanted to accept. There were no broken windows. No damaged locks. No forced entry. Nothing that suggested someone had fought their way inside. Everything looked normal. Except for the blood. Except for the missing sheets. Except for the two people who should have been there. Investigators gathered around the mattress, their faces tight. They knew what this kind of scene usually meant. They knew what level of injury could leave a mark like that. And they knew that it was unlikely, almost impossible, for someone to lose that much blood and walk away alive. Still, they had no body. No witnesses. No screams reported in the night. No sounds heard by neighbors. Nothing but a violent scene and two missing people. Detectives split up. Some began interviewing neighbors. Others continued examining the house. They looked for footprints, fingerprints, anything disturbed, anything out of place. But the home was clean. Too clean, some of them thought. There were no signs of a struggle anywhere else. No overturned furniture. No signs that Jennifer had tried to run or fight back. It was as if whatever happened had happened mostly in that one room, quietly enough that no one heard, controlled enough that the rest of the house stayed untouched. That alone raised questions. Terrible questions. Was this done by someone who knew the family? Someone who knew the layout of the home? Someone who Jennifer trusted enough to let inside without a word? Or was it someone who slipped in silently, carrying out something planned, leaving as if they had never entered? Officers searched outside the house too. The yard. The bushes. The driveway. They checked the garage. They checked the street. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no blood trail, no abandoned items. Nothing to follow. The longer the search went on, the more the fear grew. Jennifer was missing. Abigail was missing. And with every passing minute, the sense that time was running out became heavier. Inside the home, investigators began gathering items for evidence. They cut away parts of the mattress. They collected fibers. They took photographs from every angle. The bedroom turned into a quiet, grim crime scene. Flash after flash lit up the room, capturing the truth that the house itself couldn't speak. A missing mother. A missing child. And a stain that said something terrible had happened. Neighbors watched from their windows as officers went in and out. Whispers spread quickly around the street. Something serious had happened in the Blagg home. Something far worse than anyone wanted to imagine. Mothers pulled their children closer. People stayed on their porches, waiting for news, hoping there was some explanation that didn't involve danger. But inside the home, detectives knew the reality. They had been to scenes like this before. They had seen the way tragedies begin with silence, with a calm house that holds a secret too big for its walls. They didn't say it out loud, not yet, but most of them already feared what they were looking at. This wasn't just a missing person call. This wasn't just a mother who left the house early or a child who wandered off. This looked like the beginning of a double tragedy. But until they found bodies, they couldn't say for sure. Until they had answers, they had to keep looking. Until they understood what happened, they had to hope. Hope for a chance, hope for a sign, hope for something that pointed toward life instead of loss. And so the search began. For Jennifer. For Abigail. For the truth hidden inside that silent home. A truth that would lead investigators down a path darker than anyone in that neighborhood ever expected. The search for Jennifer and little Abigail began before the sun even finished rising. The sky was still dim, a soft gray that made every house on the street look colder than usual. Police cars lined the road outside the Blagg home. Their lights were quiet now, but the glow still flashed across mailboxes and windows like a warning that something terrible had taken place. Neighbors stepped outside in their pajamas, whispering to one another, trying to understand why officers were moving in and out of the house with serious faces. Word spread fast. A mother and her 6-year-old daughter were gone. No one had heard anything during the night. No loud thump, no shouting, no cry for help. Just silence. A quiet that now felt unnatural. By mid-morning, the search had already grown into something huge. Police asked for help from the community, and people showed up in thick jackets, gloves, and hats. They didn't know Jennifer personally, and most had never met Abigail, but it didn't matter. A missing child pulls everyone in. A missing mother only sharpens the fear. Officers started organizing groups. They handed out maps of the surrounding areas, showing walking trails, wooded sections, empty fields, and roads that led out of town. People grabbed flashlights, water bottles, long sticks to move through brush, and notebooks to write down anything strange they might find. Hundreds of volunteers formed lines and began sweeping through open land. Their footsteps moved in rhythm, brushing through dry grass and leaves. From far away, the line looked like a wave inching across the landscape, searching for even the smallest sign that Jennifer or Abigail had passed through. Police dogs were brought in next. Strong, trained, and serious, they pulled at their leashes, eager to begin. Handlers let them sniff items from the Blagg home. A shirt, a blanket, something that had their scent. Then the dogs moved forward, noses low to the ground, weaving back and forth as they followed trails only they could detect. Helicopters hovered above, their sound echoing across the quiet countryside. From the sky, search teams looked small, almost fragile, scattered across the wide land. But the hope was simple. If Jennifer or Abigail were out there, someone would find them. Hours passed, and the wind kept picking up. Leaves blew across the dirt roads. People called out Jennifer's name softly, then louder. They called Abigail's name too, their voices growing sadder each time there was no response. At the Blagg house, investigators kept working. The crime scene team went in and out, carrying evidence bags and equipment. They examined the mattress again and again. They searched the garage, the kitchen, the living room, every space that could hold a clue. But the hardest place to walk into was Abigail's bedroom. Her room was still filled with her drawings, her dolls, her tiny shoes lined up beside her bed. Everything looked untouched, frozen in time, like a little girl had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. A small blanket lay crumpled on the floor near her stuffed animals. Her favorite pink pajamas were still under the pillow. But the silence in that room was heavy. It was the kind of silence that made officers stop for a breath. The kind that reminded them they were looking for someone who should have been there, someone whose laughter should have been filling the air. One officer, a father himself, stood by the door for a long moment. He scanned the shelves filled with children's books and colorful toys. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said enough. It's every parent's nightmare. A child's bed empty, their life interrupted without warning, their safety suddenly uncertain. As the day continued, the search radius widened. Volunteers began checking drainage ditches, old barns, and abandoned sheds. Officers marked tire tracks and footprints in the mud, unsure if they were connected or just everyday marks left behind by farmers or trucks traveling through. A group of volunteers stopped near a small creek. The water was cold and shallow, sliding over rocks and branches. They walked along both sides, scanning the ground. One woman crouched down to examine something, only to exhale in disappointment when it turned out to be a piece of torn fabric from an old jacket. They kept moving, not willing to give up. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped. People wrapped their jackets tighter, their breaths turning white in the air. But no one wanted to stop. No one wanted to be the person who walked away before the job was done. They kept searching through the fading light, hoping the next hill or the next corner would reveal something, anything, that explained where Jennifer and Abigail had gone. At the official command post, officers gathered around maps. Red circles marked the areas already covered. Blue lines showed the next planned routes. Pins were pushed into locations where possible clues had been found. And yet, every report coming in carried the same message: nothing. No clothes. No footprints. No belongings. No sound. No sign the mother and daughter had ever stepped out of the house. And that absence, that complete emptiness, terrified everyone involved. Back inside the Blagg home, an officer gently lifted one of Abigail's drawings from her desk. It showed a stick-figure family, a tall father, a smiling mother, and a tiny girl with a big grin. They held hands under a bright yellow sun. A normal picture drawn by a child who believed the world was safe. The officer placed it back just as carefully as he'd picked it up. Outside, the sky finally began to darken. Volunteers slowly returned, tired, cold, and frustrated. Some wiped their eyes. Others stared at the ground. Everyone wanted answers, but the day had ended with only questions. Why was there so much silence in that house? Where did Jennifer go? And where was little Abigail, the girl with the bright smile and the innocent drawings? As night settled in, families in the neighborhood locked their doors with trembling hands. Parents checked on their children twice, then a third time. They tucked them in tightly, kissed them on the forehead, and whispered promises that everything was okay, even though something inside them said the world was not as safe as they thought it was. The search would continue the next day, and the day after. But for now, the missing mother and child were nowhere to be found. Only their empty rooms, their quiet home, and a community full of fear remained behind. As the days passed with no sign of Jennifer and little Abigail, investigators began turning their attention to the one person who should have been able to help them the most: Michael, the husband and father. At first, he appeared calm and polite. He answered questions with steady eyes and a soft voice. He prayed with church members, held hands with neighbors, and talked about faith helping him stay strong. To outsiders, he looked like a man dealing with a terrible tragedy the best way he could. But detectives are trained to look past the surface. And the more time they spent with him, the more something didn't feel right. It started small, almost invisible. Little pauses in his stories. Moments where he seemed to search for answers that should have come naturally. Times when his words didn't match the facts they were finding inside the home. The first red flag was the timeline. Michael had given a clear explanation of his night and early morning routine. But when officers compared his statements to what they were uncovering at the scene, the pieces didn't fit together as neatly as he made them sound. Detectives began replaying his interviews. His tone was the same every time: calm, controlled, emotionless. It wasn't that he needed to cry or fall apart. Everyone handles fear differently. But there was something cold about his steadiness. Something too smooth. As if he was trying hard to appear perfect instead of simply being honest. Investigators watched the way he moved, the way he folded his hands, the way he repeated certain phrases like he was trying to guide the conversation. Even his politeness felt practiced, like a mask he had worn for a long time. And when the mask slipped even a little, detectives caught a glimpse of something underneath, something sharp and uncomfortable. As they dug deeper into his life, they found habits that didn't match his public image. He was a respected worker, a church-going man, someone known for being quiet and responsible. But behind that carefully shaped reputation was a different reality. Private messages. Long nights on the computer. Interests and behavior that clashed with the clean family man picture he showed the world. Nothing illegal. Nothing directly connected to the disappearance. But enough to make investigators step back and reconsider everything they thought they knew about him. One detective described it later as a feeling, a slow tightening in the air. Every time they visited the Blagg home, the team felt the same coldness in the rooms Michael had walked through. The house didn't feel like a crime scene created by a stranger. It felt like something that had happened quietly, by someone who already knew every corner of the space. There was no forced entry. No broken locks. No calls for help. No sign Jennifer or Abigail had tried to escape. Whoever was responsible moved through the home with confidence, without rushing, without fear of being discovered. That detail alone shifted their focus sharply. Investigators returned to speak with Michael again. They asked him to explain his timeline one more time. They asked about his marriage, his daughter, his daily habits, his routine. And his answers were mechanical, memorized, as if he had practiced them in his head before saying them out loud. He talked about his job and his long work hours. He talked about his faith. He talked about how much he loved his daughter. But each answer felt like it had been polished for an audience, like he was trying to avoid a flaw they hadn't asked about yet. Detectives began asking about the marriage more directly. About arguments. About stress. About how Jennifer was feeling in the days before she disappeared. And here, Michael hesitated, just for a second. A tiny pause. But to investigators, that pause spoke volumes. In that silence, they sensed fear. Not fear of losing Jennifer, but fear of revealing something he didn't want them to know. One officer later described the moment as a crack in the ice. And once the ice cracks, it doesn't stop. Investigators began interviewing coworkers, friends, church members, neighbors. They asked about the couple's relationship, about Michael's personality, about what he was like behind closed doors. And that's when the hidden habits started coming to the surface. People mentioned his need for control, his strict rules, his short temper when things didn't go his way. Nothing shocking on its own, but when combined with everything else, it painted a different picture. A man whose calm surface hid something darker underneath. Detectives learned about the long hours he spent alone late at night, working on the computer long after his family had gone to bed. The content he browsed. The secret messages he sent. Private activities that clashed with the image he showed at church, where he stood beside his family in pressed clothes, smiling softly as if nothing in the world could shake him. Investigators began studying his finances, his phone records, his behavior the morning Jennifer and Abigail went missing. They studied the way he spoke about his daughter, the way he mentioned his wife only when he had to. They noticed he rarely asked questions. He never demanded a bigger search team. He didn't show panic. He didn't show urgency. Most parents in his situation would be frantic, begging the police to look in new places, asking if there were updates every hour. Michael simply waited. Controlled. Almost too comfortable. That stillness made detectives' stomachs twist. It was the kind of stillness that didn't match a searching father. It matched someone who already knew the ending. The more they learned, the tighter the circle closed. The emotional pressure inside the investigation grew heavier by the day. Officers started staying up late, reading case files again and again, highlighting contradictions. They compared notes over coffee, shaking their heads as each new detail pointed in the same direction. The community also began noticing the shift. People whispered among themselves. Volunteers who had searched for days felt a growing unease around Michael's calm presence. Friends who once defended him started asking quiet questions. If he wasn't hiding anything, why did his words feel so rehearsed? Why did his face never change? Why did the truth always feel just out of reach when he spoke? Detectives didn't announce anything yet. They kept working, gathering facts, not assumptions. But behind closed doors, in quiet rooms filled with case folders and photos of Jennifer and Abigail, an unspoken agreement settled across the team. Something about Michael was wrong. Something he wasn't saying. Something he didn't want anyone to see. And whatever that hidden truth was, they felt it moving closer with every new clue they uncovered. Because suspicion wasn't just growing now, it was taking shape. Months passed, and the town slowly settled into a strange kind of numbness. The posters with Jennifer and Abigail's faces remained on store doors and community boards, but people walked by them with heavy hearts. The search teams still looked through fields and rivers on weekends, hoping for even the smallest clue. But every day that went by without an answer felt like a door closing. Detectives kept working, even when hope felt thin. They reviewed every interview, every piece of evidence, every report from the searches. And though they didn't say it out loud, everyone knew the same truth. Mother and daughter don't simply vanish without someone making it happen. Something terrible had been done inside that quiet home. Something the missing mother had no chance to escape. Still, no matter how hard investigators pushed, they were stuck. No new leads. No new sightings. No signs that Abigail was anywhere out there. Detectives often stayed in the office long after dark, staring at the photos pinned to the board. Jennifer smiling in family photos, Abigail with her bright eyes and tiny hands holding crayons. Two faces that deserved answers. Two lives that deserved justice. Then one cold morning, everything changed. It began with a phone call from the landfill over an hour away. A worker had found something buried deep inside a mountain of trash, something that didn't belong. The moment the words reached the sheriff's office, investigators grabbed their gear and rushed out the door. They had taken dozens of calls before, false alarms, mistakes, debris mistaken for remains, but something about this one felt different. When they arrived, the air smelled strong and sour, the way landfills always do, but today it carried something heavier, something that made even the seasoned officers pause. Workers led them toward a section where large machines had pushed piles aside earlier that morning. And there, half hidden beneath layers of waste, was the truth they had feared for months. A human body. The landfill went silent. Workers stepped back. Officers put up tape, radios crackling as more units were called in. Detectives approached slowly, with the same quiet respect they used in the worst scenes. One glance at the clothing was enough. One look at the delicate frame, the long dark hair, and the familiar jewelry still on the wrist. It was Jennifer. The confirmation hit the community like a storm. People gathered in small circles outside churches, outside workplaces, outside grocery stores, whispering her name with trembling voices. Candlelight vigils sprang up again. Her family cried together in private, trying to understand the cruelty that had taken her life. But in the middle of this grief was a single, devastating question that tore through everyone's heart. If Jennifer had been found, where was her little girl? For investigators, finding the body answered one mystery but opened another that was far worse. Jennifer hadn't left on her own. She hadn't walked out that night. She hadn't chosen to disappear. Something violent had happened to her, and someone had tried to hide it. The medical team worked for hours. When the results came back, the truth was clear. Jennifer's death was not an accident. It was not a medical emergency. It was not something natural. It was deliberate. Someone had harmed her, and then thrown her away like she didn't matter. Detectives felt anger rising inside them, mixing with sadness. This was a mother who tucked her little girl into bed every night. A woman who smiled softly in photos. A gentle person who lived quietly and cared deeply for her daughter. And someone had taken her life and dumped her body in a place meant for garbage. The cruelty of it shook even the strongest officers. After the confirmation, the investigation shifted instantly from a missing person search to a full criminal case. Detectives gathered every clue with renewed determination. They re-examined the blood on the mattress, reread every line of Michael's interviews, rechecked every timeline, every detail he had told them from the first day. Finding Jennifer changed the way they read his words. Suddenly, all of his calmness, his smooth answers, his stillness, everything that had felt strange, now felt like something darker. Officers no longer wondered if something terrible had happened inside that house. Now they knew it had. The only question left was who had done it and why. And the most chilling mystery of all remained unsolved: Abigail. Her tiny shoes were still in her room. Her drawings were still taped to the wall. Her dolls still sat upright on her shelf. But the little girl was still out there somewhere, unseen, unheard, and unprotected. Some officers held on to hope, whispering that maybe she had been taken somewhere far away, that maybe she was alive. But others feared the truth that kept hovering over the case like a shadow. If someone had harmed her mother, what had they done to the only witness? The only person who could have seen what happened inside that home? Detectives tried not to let those thoughts take over, but the fear grew heavier each time they looked at the empty space beside Jennifer's photo. A space where Abigail's picture should have been alongside her mother's, if they had found her too. News of Jennifer's discovery put pressure on the department. Reporters gathered at the police station. Cameras flashed. People demanded answers. How long had she been there? Fuker. And the hardest question of all, was Abigail still alive? Investigators didn't have answers yet. But what they did have was a new fire inside the case, a new direction. For months they had been searching in the dark. Now they had proof of a violent act, proof of a cover-up, proof that someone had tried to erase this mother from the world. Detectives stood around the evidence table late that night, looking at the map pinned to the board. The landfill was not a place you stumble into. It was part of a system. Trash didn't just appear there. It followed routes. It followed schedules. It came from specific buildings and specific neighborhoods. If Jennifer's body had ended up there, it meant someone had put her into that cycle on purpose. And most of the trash collected in that section came from the Blagg home. Slowly, the room fell silent. Everyone felt the same chill move through them. The trail was pointing back toward the place where everything had started. The quiet house. The spotless rooms. The cold answers. The man who said he knew nothing. But now, with Jennifer found, the case was no longer built on guesses or suspicion. It was built on evidence. Evidence someone had tried to hide. And while one mystery had been solved, the darker one remained. Where was Abigail? What had been done to her? And how long had the truth been buried? The investigation was no longer about finding a missing family. Now it was about uncovering a deeper horror, one that had only begun to surface. After Jennifer's body was discovered in the landfill, investigators' focus turned sharply, inevitably, toward Michael. At first, they approached him carefully, as they always do in cases like this: calm voices, professional faces, questions phrased softly. But Michael's carefully crafted exterior began to crumble under the weight of evidence. The man who had seemed so composed and steady the day Jennifer and Abigail disappeared suddenly looked smaller, weaker, like a house of cards in the wind. Every detail they had been watching now carried a new meaning. His timeline, his behavior that day, the tiny cracks in his stories. Nothing could be ignored. Detectives pieced together evidence, cross-referencing phone records, financial transactions, and statements from neighbors and coworkers. And the pattern was growing impossible to dismiss. Every path led to him. Michael's private life, once hidden behind the neat image of a church-going, devoted father, began to collapse under the harsh light of investigation. Secrets surfaced, habits he had tried to hide, online searches he had hoped would remain unseen. Messages he thought private. Late-night activity no one had noticed. And every revelation, small or large, made him look less like the father people thought they knew and more like a man living in layers of lies. When detectives confronted him, the change was immediate. The calm, polite voice trembled. His measured breathing became shallow. He fidgeted with his hands, rubbed at his temples, and avoided eye contact. Officers noticed tiny movements he couldn't control: tapping fingers, a foot bouncing, eyes darting around the room. The mask of control he had worn for months was slipping. Interrogations stretched late into the night. Michael sat across from two detectives, the room dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Questions came slowly at first, almost conversational. Where had he been the night Jennifer disappeared? Did he notice anything unusual in the home? Did he have conflicts with anyone, or any reason someone would want to harm his family? He answered, at first carefully, his voice even, measured. But as the questions dug deeper, he stumbled over phrases, corrected himself, repeated stories he had already told, trying to make them fit the growing evidence against him. The first real crack came when detectives asked about his relationship with Jennifer in the months before her disappearance. He hesitated. His face went pale. His eyes flickered to the ground. For a moment, he looked like a man caught between panic and calculation. A lie hovered on his lips before he swallowed it, forcing out words that sounded rehearsed. Everything was fine. Nothing was wrong. Detectives pressed harder. They had forensic evidence now. They had the mattress, the blood, the way Jennifer's life ended in that quiet home. The weight of it all pressed into Michael's chest like invisible hands. Each pause, each tiny fumble, told the officers more than words ever could. Then came the moments of panic. His voice cracked. His composure shattered. At one point, he leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table, and whispered, almost desperately, "I don't know what happened. I swear I didn't touch her." His eyes darted toward the door as if he could escape through it. The detective stayed calm, letting him panic, letting the truth slowly claw its way out. In the public eye, Michael's life unraveled. News crews swarmed the neighborhood, capturing footage of the quiet streets, the empty home, and the father now considered the main suspect. Friends and acquaintances turned cautious, whispering among themselves. His reputation, painstakingly built over years of polite behavior and church involvement, vanished under the glare of suspicion. People who once smiled and waved at him crossed the street or avoided his gaze entirely. The image of the devoted father, the calm, religious man, was gone, replaced by fear, doubt, and accusation. The arrest came quietly but definitively. Detectives had enough evidence to charge him in Jennifer's death. They read him his rights. The words echoed in the small interrogation room, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner. Michael's face remained pale, his lips pressed tight, but there was no denying the inevitability of what had just happened. Officers led him away in handcuffs, his hands stiff at his sides. The silence in the room afterward was almost as heavy as the truth itself. Yet even as the case moved forward, Michael insisted on one thing: Abigail. Over and over, in whispers, in interviews, in court appearances, he clung to the story that someone had taken her. "Someone took Abigail," he would say, his voice a mixture of pleading and defiance. The words hung in the air, both desperate and haunting. To him, that was the one part of the story he could not, or would not, give up. Even as everything else collapsed, Abigail remained in his mouth, her name like a shield against the full force of suspicion. Detectives didn't ignore it. They investigated every possible lead, every tip that suggested she might still be alive. But months of searching had yielded nothing. No sightings. No clues. No new evidence. And as the days turned into weeks, the fear became sharper, darker. The thought of a 6-year-old girl somewhere, unseen and alone, gnawed at everyone involved in the case. Court appearances were tense. Michael sat stiffly in the defendant's chair, eyes downcast, lips pressed tight. The prosecution outlined the evidence in clear, careful language. Officers described what they found in the home, what they discovered in the landfill, the inconsistencies in his statements, the hidden habits, the secrets. Every detail made the room colder, the truth harder to ignore. Yet Michael continued to insist, quietly, that Abigail had been taken. His insistence felt almost like a final defiance, a refusal to fully admit control over the one remaining unknown. The emotional weight of the case was immense. Investigators carried the evidence and the knowledge of Jennifer's death like a heavy stone. The community watched, heartbroken and terrified. Volunteers who had searched for months felt a deep ache each time they passed the Blagg home. Families with children held them closer, whispering prayers for Abigail's safety, hoping that somewhere, somehow, she was still alive. Even as legal proceedings moved forward, the world outside the courtroom felt suspended. The mother was gone, the father was charged, and the little girl remained a question mark. A small figure whose absence cast a shadow over every face, every conversation, every quiet moment in the neighborhood. And in Michael's eyes, investigators could see the same tension, the tension of a man who had lost everything but refused, in words or in thoughts, to let go of Abigail. Behind the closed doors of interrogation rooms and offices, detectives whispered about what might come next. Would Michael ever speak the truth about Abigail? Was he protecting someone else? Or was she gone, just as tragically as her mother? Every possibility was terrifying. Every lead, no matter how small, carried the potential to either bring relief or deepen the darkness. And so, as Michael faced the consequences of his actions, as his private life crumbled under the public gaze, and as the court prepared to hear the case against him, the most haunting reality remained. Jennifer was gone. Michael was charged. Justice was in motion. But Abigail, the small girl who had filled the house with laughter, whose drawings still clung to the walls, was still missing. And the fear, the unease, and the darkness surrounding her fate had only just begun. The courtroom was quiet at first, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that presses on your chest, heavy with tension, heavy with the knowledge of everything that had happened. The trial of Michael Blagg had begun, and from the very first moment, it was clear that no one in that room would forget a single detail. Witnesses were called one by one. Detectives who had spent hours combing the Blagg home described the blood-stained mattress, the empty rooms, and the signs of a crime carefully hidden in plain sight. They spoke in calm, measured tones, reading facts aloud that sounded almost unreal. And as they did, every person listening felt the horror settle deeper. Neighbors testified next. They described the family from the outside: the neat lawn, the quiet demeanor, the church-going man, and the gentle mother. They spoke about the little girl who played on the sidewalk, her laughter filling the street. The contrast between the normal life they had seen and the nightmare the investigators had uncovered was almost unbearable. Then came the forensic experts. They explained how Jennifer's death had been caused, how the body had been discovered months later, and how everything pointed back to the home, to the night of November 12th. They spoke in detail, with charts and photographs, each one a silent scream in the courtroom. Every face in the room went pale. The evidence was stark, undeniable, horrifying. Through all of it, Michael sat in the defendant's chair. His hands folded neatly in his lap, his back straight, his face calm, almost unnaturally so. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his eyes to the witnesses. He didn't react as photo after photo, fact after fact, was laid bare for everyone to see. To those watching, it was the perfect mask. A man who wanted the world to believe he was untouched by what had happened. A man trying to convince everyone that the calm they saw was the truth, when the reality of the crime screamed louder than words ever could. At times, prosecutors would pause, letting the silence fill the space. And in those moments, jurors could feel the weight of everything: the mother lost, the child missing, the man who had built a life of careful appearances now standing accused of the ultimate betrayal. Every detail of the investigation, every piece of evidence pointing back to him, was there for everyone to see. And every pause allowed the horror to sink in even deeper. One witness, a close friend of Jennifer's, broke down on the stand. She spoke about Jennifer's kindness, her devotion to Abigail, and the little routines that made their family seem so ordinary. Her voice cracked as she described the last time she had seen Jennifer smile, the way she had talked about Abigail's new drawing, the quiet dreams she had shared about her daughter's future. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it was not the tense silence of focus. It was the silence of grief, of anger, of helplessness. The jury listened to each testimony, each fact, each evidence carefully explained. The case was strong. Every statement from Michael that had seemed calm or controlled now looked like a lie. Every habit that investigators had uncovered, every inconsistency in his story, painted a clearer picture of what had happened behind closed doors. And yet, there was Abigail, the 6-year-old girl who had disappeared along with her mother. Her absence was a silent echo throughout the trial. There was no body, no confirmation, no evidence that could prove what had happened to her. That absence made every moment heavier. Every fact, every word, carried with it the question no one could answer. Where was she? And what had become of her? When it came time for closing arguments, the prosecution spoke with measured emotion. They reminded the jury of the blood-stained mattress, the missing mother, the quiet house that had hidden a violent act. They spoke of Michael's calm demeanor that had masked the truth, the evidence that pointed unmistakably to him, and the pattern of lies that had been told from the very beginning. Their voice trembled only slightly, enough to carry the weight of grief, enough to show the jury that these were real lives, real tragedies, not just statistics in a case file. The defense spoke too, of course. They argued uncertainty, tried to cast doubt on timelines, suggested mistakes in evidence collection. But the strength of the investigation, the clarity of the forensic reports, and the emotional weight of every testimony overshadowed their arguments. No words could erase what had been discovered. No explanation could fill the empty space Abigail had left behind. Finally, after long hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, hands shaking slightly, and read the verdict. Guilty. Convicted of the murder of Jennifer Blagg. The words echoed in the courtroom, filling every corner with relief, sorrow, and the bitter taste of justice meted out too late for a mother who had already been taken. Michael's face remained calm, his hands folded, but in the silence that followed, even he could not hide the weight of the moment. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters crowded the halls. Cameras flashed. The public watched and listened, some relieved, some horrified, all aware of the complexity of a life that had been shattered and the girl who remained missing. Abigail's name was spoken softly by parents, whispered to their children as a reminder that even in a world that seems safe, terrible things can happen. And so the case concluded, for Jennifer at least. The mother who had been taken was finally given a form of justice. But Abigail was still missing. The little girl whose laughter once filled the Blagg home was nowhere to be found. No body, no trail, no evidence to suggest where she had gone. Michael had been convicted for one life, but the other remained a question mark that no trial, no verdict, no evidence could answer. Detectives continued to follow every tip, every lead, but each day brought only more uncertainty. And the family's tragedy was complete in its sorrow, one life recovered through justice, one life still lost in the shadows. The calm, composed man who had seemed perfect to the world was exposed as the architect of a mother's death. But the child's fate remained unknown, a haunting reminder that even the strongest investigations can sometimes leave gaps that cannot be filled. Outside the courthouse, people lit candles, whispered prayers, and remembered Jennifer. But behind the flickering lights and solemn faces, there was a quiet ache for Abigail, for the innocence stolen, and for the mystery that still lingered. Justice had been done for one, but the darkness of the unknown for the other hung heavily over the community, over the investigators, and over the story itself. Years passed, and Abigail remained missing. The small girl who had once filled the Blagg home with laughter, whose tiny hands had held crayons and drawn stick figures of her family, became a ghost in the memory of those who had loved her. Each year that went by added weight to the uncertainty, each birthday marked quietly with hope and fear. Investigators worked tirelessly, even as time moved forward. Age progressed images of Abigail were created, showing what she might look like as she grew older. In one image, she had soft brown hair, a little taller, a shy smile that seemed familiar yet distant. In another, her eyes had grown into the same deep, curious gaze her mother had. Every image carried the weight of imagination, what she could be doing, where she could be, who she might have become. For families of missing children, these images are both a tool and a torment, a reminder that the missing grow older while the world waits for answers. Experts in missing person cases weighed in on the Blagg case. They talked about what might have happened that night, the possible choices Jennifer and Abigail faced, and the way someone could vanish without leaving a trace. They spoke cautiously, understanding that speculation carried a heavy responsibility. But the truth was, no one could say for certain. The evidence was limited, the trail had gone cold, and the child's fate remained shrouded in shadows. Theories circulated, each one haunting and unsettling. Some believed Abigail had been taken that night, spirited away by someone with knowledge of the home, someone who had waited until Jennifer was no longer able to protect her. Others feared she had been harmed the same night as her mother, a terrible conclusion that no parent could bear to imagine but which could not be ruled out. There were even whispers that she might have been hidden somewhere, secreted away by a relative, or moved far from the town where she had grown up, safe from the eyes of anyone searching. Each theory carried the same darkness. A life interrupted, a child who should have been protected but was not. The emotional weight of the mystery settled over the community like a cloud. Friends and neighbors who had once walked past the Blagg home in normalcy now looked at the house with careful eyes, remembering the blood-stained mattress, the quiet nights, the day the mother's body was found. Volunteers who had searched fields, rivers, and woods spoke quietly about the girl they had never found, about how her absence became a permanent ache in their hearts. Families prayed for Abigail, hoping that somewhere, somehow, she was alive, safe, and unaware of the nightmare that had begun in her own home. Media coverage over the years helped keep her case in the public eye. Articles ran about missing children, experts discussed the difficulty of solving cases without bodies, and age-progressed images were released periodically. Each new story brought renewed hope and renewed fear. Every sighting reported, every tip followed, carried with it the bittersweet possibility of closure. But every lead so far ended the same way, in uncertainty. For the detectives who had worked the case from the very beginning, Abigail remained a question that could not be answered. Every piece of evidence they had, every conversation they had reviewed, led only to more questions. The father had been convicted of Jennifer's death, justice had been served in that sense, but the little girl's fate lingered as a shadow over every decision made in the investigation. How could justice exist when the other victim had never been found? How could peace ever come for the family when the child who had once filled their home with light was still missing? Communities, too, carried the weight. Parents watched their own children grow, celebrating birthdays, first steps, first days of school, knowing that someone else's child, Abigail, had been stolen from that simple, innocent world. Every schoolyard, every playground, every quiet evening of laughter reminded them of what could be taken in a moment, without warning and without reason. Despite the passage of time, the case remained active. Investigators revisited old evidence with new technologies, searching for DNA that might have been missed, or digital traces that had gone unnoticed. Tips continued to come in, sometimes from people who remembered seeing something unusual years before, sometimes from strangers who believed they recognized the girl in age-progressed images. Every lead was followed, every possibility considered. But the truth remained elusive. The final reality of Abigail's story is not a resolution. It is a question mark, a lingering uncertainty that stretches across decades. The mother was found, justice was done, the father was convicted. But the little girl who once held hands with her mother, whose life had been so full of simple joys, remains a mystery. And in the hearts of those who knew her, those who loved her from afar, and those who worked to find her, there is one final, haunting truth. Her case is still open. Abigail's name continues to be spoken quietly in the halls of police stations, softly in neighborhoods, and gently in prayers. She is remembered in photographs, in drawings left behind, in the memory of a laughter that once filled a home and disappeared without warning. Every year that passes, she grows older in imagination, older in hope, and older in the hearts of everyone waiting for her return. The world moves on, but her story does not. It is a reminder that innocence can be lost, that justice can be partial, and that one life, no matter how small, can leave a mark that time cannot erase. Investigators hold on to hope. Families hold on to hope. And the community, even decades later, holds on to hope that one day, Abigail will be found. Until that day, the mystery remains. The questions remain. The fear, the hope, the ache all remain. And the final note, heavy and persistent, is simple but impossible to ignore. Her case is still open. Abigail had once been a little girl full of light. Her laughter echoed through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, a sound that seemed to make everything softer, warmer, safer. She had loved crayons, drawing hearts and flowers, and leaving tiny notes for her mother that said things like, "I love you, Mommy," in uneven letters. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, her hands were always reaching for something new, and her heart was open to the world in the way only a 6-year-old's can be. The house she had grown up in seemed ordinary from the outside. A small garden, a porch that caught the morning sun, and a quiet street where neighbors waved as they walked past. But inside, it had been filled with the bright energy of a child, the smell of crayons and cookies, the soft hum of bedtime songs, and the gentle presence of a mother who cherished her. It was a home that held the promise of laughter and safety, a home that should have been a sanctuary for innocence. And then, in the night, that promise was shattered. The laughter stopped. The tiny handprints on the walls remained, but the warmth they had carried was gone. The mother was taken from the world, her life stolen, her presence reduced to a memory and a body found in a landfill. And Abigail, the bright, curious, and trusting little girl, disappeared without a trace. Communities feel grief differently when a child goes missing. In Abigail's case, it was a slow, creeping darkness. Neighbors who had once waved now spoke in hushed tones. Families walked their children home with extra caution, whispering reminders to watch out for strangers, to be careful, to never take a hand they didn't know. The world seemed colder, less safe. And for every person who knew her, there was an ache that never left. Investigators carried their own heavy weight. Each time they reviewed evidence, they could almost hear Abigail's footsteps in the house, imagine her bedtime routines, recall the small details her mother had described to friends, her favorite pajamas, her love for storybooks, the way she smiled when she had drawn something she was proud of. And every time they returned to the cold facts of the case, the blood-stained mattress, the hidden violence, the lies of the father, the ache grew. They were not just looking for evidence. They were searching for a child who should still be alive. The gap between what Abigail's life could have been and what actually happened is a sharp, painful one. She could have grown into a teenager, laughed with friends, celebrated birthdays, learned new things every day. Instead, the world has been left to wonder. Every unreturned phone call, every empty chair at a holiday table, every unmarked birthday, is a reminder of what was stolen. And for the family, the loss is not just physical. It is emotional, psychological, and ongoing. Some questions never leave a home. Some doubts never fade. The what-ifs and why hover over every memory, every photograph, every object left behind. The community, too, carries that weight. Parents glance at playgrounds, imagining Abigail running among other children. Teachers look at their classrooms, thinking of the small hands that might have sat at the desk. Neighbors remember the girl who waved from her window and wonder what might have been done to her, where she might be, and if she even remembers home at all. A small presence can leave a large absence, and in Abigail's case, that absence is still felt in every corner of the town, every street, every home. Years pass, but the memory of her bright childhood remains vivid. Age-progressed images show a girl who could be 10, 12, 15, and yet the uncertainty remains. Experts and investigators discuss possibilities. Was she taken by someone unknown? Did she witness something she was never meant to see? Was she kept hidden, perhaps in a place far from the home she once knew? Every theory is heavy with fear, every possibility tinged with grief. And through it all, the truth remains locked away, known only to someone, or maybe several people, who have never spoken it aloud. For the family, the questions never stop. Every day, they live with the duality of memory and absence. They remember the bright girl who loved life and held her mother's hand, and they mourn the darkness that followed. They wonder if she ever thinks of them, if she knows she was loved, if she remembers the safety and warmth of her home before it all disappeared. Some nights, they whisper her name into the quiet, hoping for a reply, hoping for a sign, hoping for a miracle that time has not yet delivered. And for the investigators, the case is both a puzzle and a moral burden. Every lead, every call, every tip is followed with the same intensity as the day she disappeared. Each possibility is pursued, each memory respected, each theory tested. They know that somewhere, someone has information, someone who could solve the mystery, someone who knows what happened that night. But that knowledge has remained silent, leaving the world to imagine the worst and pray for the best. The story of Abigail is a reminder that some tragedies cannot be neatly concluded. A mother's death can be prosecuted, a father can be convicted, evidence can be found, and justice can be served in one sense. But the absence of a child leaves a wound that cannot be healed with a verdict. The questions linger, unspoken and unanswerable. The mystery becomes a part of life itself, shaping every memory, every expectation, every hope for the future. And as the years stretch on, the small girl who once brought joy into a quiet home remains in the minds of those who remember her. She is a ghost in photographs, a whisper in memories, a presence in absence. Parents who never knew her imagine her smile. Friends who loved her mourn silently. Investigators who search tirelessly hold onto the faintest glimmer of hope that she might still be found, that someone, somewhere, might come forward with the truth. The final truth, heavy and haunting, settles like a shadow over the story. Some questions never leave a family. Some mysteries never fade from a community. And in the quietest corners, the whisper remains, soft, urgent, almost impossible to ignore. Someone, somewhere, still knows what happened that night. Abigail's bright childhood, full of laughter, warmth, and love, contrasts sharply with the darkness that followed. And while years pass, while seasons change, while life moves on around her, her story remains a quiet, haunting reminder of innocence lost and the questions that will not rest. The world waits, quietly and painfully, for the day when answers might finally arrive. Until then, her absence is felt. Her laughter is remembered. And her story continues to whisper through the years, asking for truth, asking for justice, asking for Abigail to be found.